He maintained correspondence with figures inside the Theosophical Society, the Rosicrucian orders, and the emerging American chapters of the Martinist order, a French esoteric tradition with roots in 18th century Christian mysticism. Within several of these traditions, the rule of anonymity is structural. Initiates of certain schools were forbidden from claiming authorship of teachings released to the public. The teachings belonged to the tradition, never to the individual carrier. Publishing under a pseudonym or under a collective designation such as the Three Initiates. Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott, and today we have a delightful episode designed around the secret mystery of the Kybalion. Who wrote this amazing book, this secret Bible of manifestation? I want you to go back in time. The press is running. Inside a narrow brown stone on a humid summer evening in Chicago, a small flatbed printing press moves through the rhythm of its work, page after page, the metallic clatter of type striking paper echoing off the brick walls of the basement room. The year is 1908. The building houses an obscure publishing company specializing in occult literature, vegetarian health pamphlets, and books on Indian philosophy written by men with Sanskrit-sounding names who appear to have no public presence outside their printed works. A man stands beside the press in shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, watching the pages emerge. He is 46 years old. His hair is dark and receding at the temples. His face carries the tired but settled expression of someone who has rebuilt his life from wreckage and now operates with a quiet, deliberate steadfastness most of his contemporaries find difficult to read. He is the owner of this publishing company. He is also the author of every word currently being struck onto the pages emerging from his press. The book is small. The finished copies will run 223 pages, bound in deep blue cloth with modest gold lettering on the spine. The title at the top of the title page is a word the man invented. It appears in no dictionary of any known language. It exists sitting at his desk earlier that year, looking for a name that would carry the weight of an ancient transmission, while belonging to no actual tradition any scholar could trace. The word is Kybalion. Below the title in small italic type, the author credit reads, by the Three Initiates. There are no three initiates. There has never been a council of three. The man watching the press run the pages is the sole author, the sole compiler, the sole intelligence behind the book about to enter the world. He has hidden his name from the cover. He has hidden the fact of his sole authorship from the public. He has invented the framing of the Three Initiates because he believes the book will reach further into the consciousness of its audience if the audience never knows who the teachings came from. The book makes a specific claim. It claims to transmit the lost teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary sage of Hellenistic Egypt, the figure whose name attaches to the foundational alchemical and esoteric literature of the ancient Mediterranean world. It claims that these teachings have been preserved across 2,000 years by an inner Hermetic tradition operating through small initiated lineages transmitted orally from master to student and never previously released to general publication. It offers no proof of this. The man at the press knows he is making a synthesis. He spent years studying the actual surviving Hermetic literature, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Emerald Tablet, the alchemical commentaries of medieval Europe, the New Thought psychology of his own American period. He has compressed all of it into 7 principles. He has framed those principles as ancient transmission because he believes ancient transmission is what the audience needs in order to receive what he has to give them. This is the same story as the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean when it was written by Maurice Doreal. The same intention. The man watches the pages emerge. He has just produced one of the most influential occult books that will ever be published in the English language. There's probably 20 amazing editions that you can listen to on YouTube. Many of those I've listened to, and they are amazing. I've repeatedly heard it through so many sources in so many places. Within a decade, the 7 Hermetic principles compressed inside the small blue volume will have entered the working vocabulary of every major New Thought teacher in America. Within 20 years, the book will be required reading inside Masonic lodges, Rosicrucian orders, and the inner study groups of the Theosophical Society. Within 50 years, the principles will have been absorbed into the lineage of nearly every modern manifestation teaching, every law of attraction framework, every consciousness-based philosophy of personal development that would eventually populate the bestseller lists of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Norman Vincent Peale will draw on it. Napoleon Hill will draw on it. Wallace Wattles will draw on it. Florence Scovell Shinn will draw on it. The Secret, almost 100 years later, will draw on it. Every major teacher who has ever explained the mechanics of how thought shapes reality, how vibration determines experience, how the mind operates as a creative force in the universe will draw somewhere upstream in their lineage on the principles assembled inside the book now emerging from the press in front of him. And for a full century, no one will know who wrote it. The 3 initiates will remain anonymous. Generations of occult scholars will speculate about their identities. Theories will proliferate. Some will hold that the initiates were a working group of high-degree Masons. Others will hold that the book was a transmission from secret European mystery schools. Others will hold that the text had been received through trance or direct telepathic dictation from the inner planes. All of these theories will be wrong. The 3 initiates is one man watching his own book emerge from a press in a Chicago basement in the summer of 1908. Who has decided that the world will receive the work more effectively if the world has no idea where it came from. His name is William Walker Atkinson. He will keep this secret for the remaining 24 years of his life. He will publish more than 20 additional books under more than a dozen invented identities. He will die in 1932 with his obituary describing him as a retired attorney and an amateur philosopher. No mention of the Kybalion, no mention of the Yogi Publication Society, no mention of any of the work that will across the following century shape the spiritual development of millions of readers around the world. He goes into the ground anonymous, and the book he writes in secret continues more than 100 years later, doing its work. This is a story of a man who wrote the manual the modern world has been reading for over a century without ever knowing his name. And the 7 principles he assembled inside that book that continue today to govern every successful application of conscious creation any human being has ever performed. Go back further into the life of the man at the press. William Walker Atkinson was born in Baltimore in December 1862 at the height of the American Civil War. His early life followed the conventional Victorian arc of an ambitious young American man. He worked as a grocery clerk, then a bookkeeper, then qualified for the bar and practiced law in Pennsylvania for several years. The career broke him. By his mid-30s, Atkinson had suffered what would now be diagnosed as a complete nervous collapse, complicated by what he later described as a profound spiritual crisis. He lost his law practice. He lost most of his money. He lost his health. His marriage came apart. He found himself at the close of the 19th century in a state of total exhaustion, searching for any framework that could restore his vitality and his capacity to function. He found that framework in the emerging New Thought movement. New Thought was the loose constellation of metaphysical teachings that had grown out of the work of Phineas Quimby, Mary Baker Eddy, Emma Curtis Hopkins, and a dozen other 19th century American mystics who had developed practical methods for using mental focus to heal physical illness and shift personal circumstance. The movement remained, in this period, loosely organized rather than institutional. It was a network of teachers, healers, small publishers, and devoted students scattered across the country, exchanging ideas through correspondence, through small monthly magazines, and through the lecture circuit that connected the major American cities. Atkinson studied the available literature voraciously. He recovered his health. He recovered his finances. By 1900, he had relocated to Chicago, the center of the New Thought publishing industry, and begun writing his own material. By 1903, he was editing a major monthly magazine called New Thought. By 1907, he had founded the Yogi Publication Society, the publishing house that would, the following year, release the Kybalion. And here the story becomes strange. Atkinson refused to publish his books under his own name. He created characters. His most successful pseudonym was Yogi Ramacharaka. You can actually listen to the writings of Yogi Ramacharaka on my channel. Just look up Brian Scott Yogi Ramacharaka, and you'll find it there. A fictional Hindu yogi supposedly residing in India and transmitting the ancient wisdom traditions of the East to Western readers. Under the Ramacharaka name, Atkinson wrote 13 books across the early years of the 20th century, including Hatha Yoga, The Science of Breath, a series of lessons in Raja Yoga, which is the one that I read. I read each chapter way back at the beginning of my channel, a series of lessons in Gnani Yoga, mystic Christianity, and several others. These books became foundational texts for the early Western yoga movement. Millions of readers believed for decades they were studying the works of an authentic Indian master. There was no Yogi Ramacharaka. The yogi was Atkinson, working at a desk in Chicago, writing in a borrowed voice he had invented to give his teachings the cultural authority a Midwestern American lawyer had struggled to claim. Atkinson invented other characters as needed. Theron Dumont, a personal magnetism teacher who wrote books on memory, concentration, and the development of personal power. Dumont was Atkinson. Swami Bhakta Vishita, another Hindu sage who specialized in occult phenomenon and psychic development. Bhakta Vishita was Atkinson. Magus Incognito, the anonymous master who wrote the secret doctrines of the Rosicrucians, Magus was Atkinson. Swami Panchadasi, who wrote on clairvoyance, the human aura, and astral projection, Panchadasi was Atkinson. There were others. The count varies depending on which scholarly investigation one trusts, but the consensus is that Atkinson published under at least 12 separate pseudonyms across his lifetime, in addition to his work under his own name. He was, by any honest accounting, the most prolific occult writer of the early 20th century. He hid most of the words of it behind invented identities. So why? Why did he hide? The standard explanation offered by Atkinson's biographers and scholars who have worked to reconstruct his career is that he understood marketing. An American lawyer writing books on Hindu yoga had little credibility with the audience interested in Hindu yoga. A Hindu yogi, on the other hand, carried the kind of cultural weight no Western author could replicate. The Ramacharaka persona allowed Atkinson to teach what he wanted to teach in the voice his audience needed to hear. The same logic applied to other pseudonyms. The audience for ceremonial magic wanted to read Magus, never a Midwestern publisher. The audience for personal magnetism wanted to read a teacher with a French-sounding name and an air of European sophistication. Atkinson supplied all of these characters as the market demanded them. But the standard explanation, while accurate, fails to account for something deeper. Atkinson hid his name when there was no market reason to hide it. He hid it on the Kybalion, a book about Western Hermetic philosophy written for an American audience already familiar with his work, where his actual name would have carried significant authority. The book would have sold better with his name on it. He hid it on later books published on cryptic pseudonyms, even after the Ramacharaka identity had become so successful that any publisher would have welcomed his real name on the cover. He hid it consistently across decades in ways the standard marketing explanation has difficulty fully accounting for. Other researchers have proposed a different explanation. Atkinson, they argue, was an initiate. He had connection to esoteric orders. Clearly, he knew a lot more than he was giving on. I believe he was educated in mystery schools. His connections to esoteric orders, the public record only partially documented. He worked closely with Paul Foster Case, who would later found the builders of the Aditya, one of the most rigorous Hermetic schools to operate in the 20th century. He collaborated with Michael Whitty, the editor of Azoth magazine, the most influential occult journal of the period. He maintained correspondence with figures inside the Theosophical Society, the Rosicrucian orders, and the emerging American chapters of the Martinist order, a French esoteric tradition with roots in 18th century Christian mysticism. Within several of these traditions, the rule of anonymity is structural. Initiates of certain schools were forbidden from claiming authorship of teachings released to the public. The teachings belonged to the tradition, never to the individual carrier. Publishing under a pseudonym or under a collective designation such as the Three Initiates was the proper way to release material that originated in the receiver's understanding from sources older and larger than any single human personality. Whether Atkinson hid his name out of marketing strategy, out of esoteric obligation, out of personal humility, or out of some combination of all three, the result was the same. He produced one of the most influential bodies of occult literature ever assembled in the English language, and he ensured that no living person would associate his name with any of it during his lifetime. He died in November 1932 at the age of 69 in California. His obituary in the local newspaper described him as a retired attorney and amateur philosopher. The obituary made no mention of the Kybalion, Ramacharaka, the Yogi publication, or anything like that. He went into the ground anonymous, and the book he wrote in secret continued doing its work. The Kybalion presents itself as a compressed transmission of 7 foundational principles governing the operation of reality. Atkinson framed these principles as preserved fragments of the lost Hermetic corpus, the body of philosophical literature attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary thrice great Hermes, whose teachings shaped the alchemical, astrological, and esoteric traditions of the Hellenistic world. Modern scholarship has shown that the actual Hermetic texts of antiquity, the Corpus Hermeticum and the Emerald Tablet, contain language and concepts the Kybalion draws from, but expresses with a specificity the original Hermetic literature would have found unfamiliar. Atkinson was synthesizing. He was taking the broad architecture of ancient Hermetic philosophy, integrating it with new thought psychology of his own period, and producing a structured presentation no surviving ancient text actually contains. The synthesis worked. It's brilliant. The 7 principles, as Atkinson assembled them, possesses an internal coherence and a practical applicability the original Hermetic literature had never quite achieved. They function as a complete operational manual for the conscious participation in reality, and they have been used as such by a century of subsequent teachers. Here are the principles as the Kybalion represents them. The first principle is the principle of mentalism. The Kybalion states, in 7 words, the all is mind. The universe is mental. Reality, the principle, declares, is a single living consciousness expressing itself through the appearance of separation. Everything that exists within the mind of the all. There is no matter independent of mind. There are no events independent of consciousness. The entire field of experience is the thought content of an infinite awareness. The second principle is the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. The pattern operating at the highest level of reality repeats itself at every lower level. The structure of the atom mirrors the structure of the solar system. The dynamics of an individual personality mirror the dynamics of a nation. The currents of a single human emotion mirror the currents of the planetary collective consciousness. The macrocosm and the microcosm participate in the same underlying architecture, and what can be observed at one scale can be inferred at any other. The third principle is the principle of vibration. Nothing rests. Everything moves, everything vibrates. From the densest stone to the highest spiritual reality, every aspect of existence is a specific rate of vibration. The differences between matter, energy, and consciousness are differences in the speed and quality of vibratory motion. Higher vibrations correspond to subtler, more refined states. Lower vibrations correspond to denser, more material states. The skilled practitioner of the Hermetic art learns to alter the rate of vibration in his own consciousness, and through that alteration to shift the conditions of his experience. The fourth principle is the principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has its pair of opposites. Heat and cold, light and dark, love and hate, courage and fear, wealth and poverty, joy and grief. The Kybalion teaches that these apparent opposites are the same essential thing at different degrees of expression. Hot and cold operate as a single phenomenon. They are two ends of a single temperature spectrum. Love and hate function as a single emotion. They are two roles of one relational energy that can be moved along its axis by an act of conscious will. The Hermetic master, recognizing this, learns the art of polarity, the deliberate shifting of his own state from one end of any spectrum to the other. The fifth principle is the principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. Every action has its reaction. Every advance has its retreat. The pendulum swings in every domain of life, from the rise and fall of empires to the moods of an individual personality across the span of a single day. The Hermeticist learns the law of rhythm and learns to neutralize its effects on his own experience through the application of mental polarization, holding his own awareness at a chosen point on the spectrum and refusing the downward swing of the pendulum. The sixth principle is the principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Nothing happens by chance. What appears as chance is the operation of a law the observer has yet to discover. The ordinary person operates as the effect of causes set in motion by forces beyond his understanding. The Hermetic master operates as a cause, deliberately initiating chains of effect through the focused application of will, intention, and mental discipline. The seventh principle is the principle of gender. Gender exists in everything, the masculine and feminine principles operating at every level of reality. The masculine principle initiates, projects, asserts. The feminine principle receives, conceives, gestates. These are aspects of every act of creation, every relationship, every mental process, every spiritual movement. Creation occurs through the union of the two within any system. A single mind in dialogue with itself, or the source of the universe expressing itself into the field of manifestation. 7 principles, 223 pages. A complete operational philosophy of reality assembled by a single anonymous author in Chicago in the summer of 1908. The book describes 7 planes of correspondence ranging from the great physical plane through the great mental plane and culminating in the great spiritual plane, each plane operating by the same 7 principles applied at the different rates of vibration. The Hermetic art in Atkinson's framing involves the conscious movement of awareness between these planes, with the practitioner learning to bring the higher plane perspectives down into the practical conditions of ordinary embodied life. The book introduces the concept of the all, the single underlying reality of which everything else is an expression. The all, the Kybalion declares, escapes definition in human language because human language emerged inside the manifest field and lacks the categories required to describe what generated the field itself. The all can only be approached through paradox, through the simultaneous holding of contradictions, through the recognition that any positive statement about its nature must be balanced by an equally true negative statement. The all is everywhere and nowhere. The all knows itself and remains a mystery to itself. The all creates everything and creates nothing because everything that exists already exists within it. The all is the only reality and the only illusion. These paradoxes are deliberate. They function in the Kybalion's framing as discipline for the student's mind, forcing the awareness to release its habit of conceptual capture and approach the source of reality through direct experience rather than through definition. The book treats this paradoxical structure as essential to the deeper Hermetic teaching. Atkinson, whether drawing on authentic ancient sources or improvising from his own contemplative experience, articulated a philosophy of the all that aligns precisely with the apophatic theology of the Christian mystics, the via negativa of the Neoplatonists, the formless ground of consciousness described in the Indian Advaita tradition, and the empty fullness of the Buddhist Mahayana literature. Whatever else he was, the man writing under the name 3 Initiates had read deeply and synthesized broadly. The Kybalion does more than describe the principles. The book asserts that these principles, properly understood, deliver a specific power into the hands of the trained practitioner. The power is called mental transmutation. Atkinson treated this as the central practical teaching of the entire Hermetic tradition. Transmutation in the alchemical sense was the supposed art of converting base metals into gold. The medieval alchemists in Atkinson's reading had been working with the wrong material. The actual transmutation Hermes had taught was the transmutation of mental states, of consciousness itself, of the inner conditions producing the outer experience. The Kybalion phrases it directly: mind, as well as metals and elements, may be transmuted from state to state, from degree to degree, from condition to condition, from pole to pole, from vibration to vibration. True Hermetic transmutation is a mental art. The practitioner who understands the 7 principles can move his own consciousness from any state to any other state, deliberately, through the application of focused will. Fear can be transmuted into courage. Poverty consciousness can be transmuted into abundance consciousness. Grief into peace, hatred into love. The mechanism is the principle of polarity. If fear and courage are 2 poles of a single spectrum, rather than 2 separate emotions, then movement from one to the other requires only a change in degree along the same axis. The practitioner identifies his current position on the spectrum, recognizes the destination he wishes to reach, and deliberately shifts his polarization from one end toward the other through sustained focus on the target state. The Kybalion warns that this technique, while simple in principle, requires consistent practice to master. The ordinary human mind oscillates between poles without conscious control, swept back and forth by the rhythmic law operating on its emotional life. The Hermetic practitioner learns to neutralize the swing of the pendulum, to hold himself stable at a chosen polarization regardless of the surrounding conditions attempting to pull him to the opposite extreme. This is identical to one of the few techniques that Ra offered in the Law of One material. You go through your day and you take any principal emotion that you've been through, and then you go into polarity and review the opposite of it. Atkinson described this as the deepest secret of the Hermetic tradition. The ordinary person is a slave of his moods. He feels what circumstances produce in him. He swings from joy to sorrow, from confidence to despair, from love to bitterness, in patterns that appear to be the natural response to events. The Hermetic master breaks this pattern. He selects his state. He holds this state through whatever circumstance arises. He refuses to let the swing of the pendulum determine the position of his consciousness. And here, the teaching connects to the deeper principle, because the universe is mental. The conditions of the practitioner's consciousness shape the conditions of the practitioner's experience. The state held stably in awareness becomes, across time, the state expressed in outer life. The transmutation accomplished inwardly produces the transmutation observed outwardly. The art of polarity applied to the inner spectrum becomes the art of conscious creation applied to the outer world. This is what every major manifestation teacher has been transmitting in different languages, with different examples, through different cultural framings. Neville Goddard's assumption of the wish fulfilled is the holding of the chosen polarization until it manifests. Wallace Wattles' certain way of thinking is the deliberate selection of a mental state. Florence Scovell Shinn's spoken word is the act of declaring the polarization aloud to anchor it in awareness. Esther Hicks' emotional guidance scale is a rebranding of the spectrum of polarity. The secret's law of attraction is the consequence of stabilized polarization producing matched conditions in the outer field. Every one of these teachings descends directly or indirectly from the principles assembled by a single anonymous author in a Chicago publishing house in 1908. The man who wrote the manual never received credit. The manual continues operating regardless. Now return to the title. The book is called the Kybalion. The word appears nowhere in any historical Hermetic text. No Greek, Egyptian, Latin, Hebrew, or Arabic source contains the term. It exists in no dictionary or language. Atkinson invented it. The book itself frames the word as the name of a hidden body of aphorisms preserved by the inner Hermetic schools and transmitted orally across generations of initiates. The Kybalion in the book's framing is the secret core of the tradition, the compressed wisdom from which the public Hermetic texts were derived. The book the reader holds, according to its own claim, is a partial translation of this secret oral teaching released for the first time to a general audience. No evidence for the existence of such an oral tradition has ever been produced. The aphorisms quoted throughout the book attributed to the Kybalion as their source were written by Atkinson. The voice that speaks through these, the voice that declares the lips of wisdom, are closed except to the ears of understanding. The voice that issues commands and explanations with the calm authority of an ancient master is Atkinson, speaking through an invented persona, shifting his own identity, the same way Ramacharaka, Dumont, and Magus Incognito were invented personas through which Atkinson published other material. The Kybalion presented itself as ancient transmission. It is a measurable historical fact, the work of a single American author in 1908, and yet the teachings of the book transmit are genuinely ancient. The principles of mentalism, that is all is mind, traces directly to the passages of the Corpus Hermeticum, the actual Hermetic literature surviving from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Multiple passages in the corpus describe the cosmos as a thought in the mind of the creator, the visible world as a reflection of the mental reality, the human mind as a fragment of the divine mind, temporarily separated to experience itself in form. Atkinson inherited this. He compressed and clarified an ancient teaching. The principle of correspondence, as above, so below, derives from the Emerald Tablet itself, the foundational alchemical text attributed to Hermes Trismegistus and circulated in Latin translations across medieval Europe. Tablet's most famous line, quod est superius est sicut quod est inferius, is the direct ancestor of Atkinson's restatement. He inherited it, he clarified it. The principle of polarity traces to the dialectical philosophy of the pre-Socratic Greeks and to the alchemical doctrine of the unity of opposites preserved in medieval European alchemy. Heraclitus had taught it, the alchemists had encoded it in their symbol systems, Atkinson assembled it into structured form. Every principle, in fact, has authentic ancestors in the historical record. So even if he wrote it using the 3 initiates, it is still absolutely a divine text to me. He took fragments scattered across 2,000 years of Hermetic, Neoplatonic, alchemical, and esoteric literature, assembled them into a clean, modern presentation, gave them structural unity the original sources had never achieved, and released them in a form readable by ordinary Americans in the early 20th century who had no Latin or Greek, no familiarity with the medieval esoteric corpus, and no patience for the deliberate obscurity of the original Hermetic texts. The book was a translation in the deepest sense, a translation of an entire tradition into the language and conceptual structure of modern English-speaking readers, a translation that delivered in 223 pages what would have required hundreds of pages of medieval alchemy commentary and years of study to extract from the surviving sources. Atkinson invented the word Kybalion to give his synthesis a name, and he assembled under that name the actual ancient teaching presented for the first time in a modern form. The historical reach of the Kybalion has been almost impossible to overstate. The book never appeared on the bestseller list. It received no major reviews in mainstream publications. It was sold quietly through occult bookshops and mail-order catalogs and small magazines. For the first several decades after its release, the general reading public had no awareness of it. And yet, across the 20th century, the 7 principles assembled inside it migrated outward through every major channel of American spiritual instruction. Norman Vincent Peale published The Power of Positive Thinking in 1952. The book reached more than 5 million readers across its first decade. Its central teachings on the power of expectation, mental focus, practical application of belief to outer circumstance descend directly from the Kybalion through the New Thought tradition Atkinson helped shape. Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, published in 1937, taught the principles of mental cause and effect, the disciplined application of focused desire, and the necessity of holding a chosen state of consciousness until external conditions conform to it. Every chapter draws on the framework Atkinson had assembled. Wallace Wattles' The Science of Getting Rich, published in 1910, 2 years after the Kybalion, articulated the principle that there is a thinking substance from which all things are made, and that a person can produce in this substance anything he wishes through the focused application of mental will. Wattles knew Atkinson's work. The lineage is direct. Florence Scovell Shinn drew on it, Ernest Holmes drew on it, Charles Fillmore drew on it. The entire New Thought movement of the early and middle 20th century operated downstream of the synthesis Atkinson had quietly produced. When Esther Hicks began channeling Abraham in the 1980s and articulating the law of attraction in a vocabulary that would eventually spread through every corner of the world, the architecture she was describing was the architecture of vibration and polarity Atkinson had set down 70 years earlier. In fact, sometimes I feel like when I listen to Abraham, that it's an assemblage, a social memory complex that includes characters like Atkinson that are coming through. When Rhonda Byrne released The Secret in 2006 and watched it become the best-selling spiritual book of the 21st century, she was synthesizing the same principles into yet another presentation with the same operational core Atkinson had compressed into 7 aphorisms. When the modern manifestation industry produces its workshops, its courses, its podcasts, its retreats, its YouTube channels, its TikTok teachers, the framework being transmitted is the framework the anonymous author of the Kybalion had assembled in Chicago in 1908. Never seeking credit, he published the book, watched it find its audience, and continued writing under his other invented names until his death 24 years later. His grave in Forest Hill Cemetery in Pasadena, California, carries only his given name. There's no marker indicating that the man buried beneath the stone was the most influential occult writer of the 20th century. There's no acknowledgement of the books he wrote. The historical record left him alone, anonymous in the ground. And the book he wrote continues, more than a century later, doing its work. What do you do with this? The principles assembled in the Kybalion are usable. They have been used by every major successful practitioner of conscious creation across the past 100 years. They were used by Atkinson himself, who restored his own broken health and finances through their application before he began transmitting them to others. The practice is straightforward in structure and demanding in execution. Begin with the first principle. The universe is mental. Reality is the thought content of an infinite awareness. Your own consciousness is a localized expression of that same awareness, with a measure of creative authority operating inside the field of your direct experience. Hold this. Sit with it. Allow it to become more than a concept. Allow it to become a working assumption you operate from, the way a fish operates from the assumption of water without thinking about water. Apply the second principle, as above, so below. Whatever is true at the highest level of reality is also true in the conditions of your daily life. The thoughts you sustain in awareness shape the body that carries you, shape the relationships that surround you, the financial conditions you move through, the work you find yourself doing. The macrocosm and the microcosm operate by the same laws. What you do with the inner field is what determines the outer field. Apply the third principle. Everything vibrates. Your states of consciousness are specific rates of vibration. Higher states produce experiences of expansion, clarity, ease, and abundance. Lower states produce experience of contraction, confusion, struggle, scarcity, fear. You can shift your vibration. The shift requires discipline, sustained across time, shifting your experience. Apply the fourth principle. Polarity is the operating mechanism for all transmutation. Whatever state you wish to occupy exists on the same spectrum as the state you currently occupy. Move along the spectrum. The destination is already part of the same axis on which you already are located. Apply the fifth principle. The pendulum swings. Recognize the rhythm. Refuse to be carried by it. When the swing arrives that would pull you toward a lower state, polarize yourself at the higher end of the spectrum and hold the position. The pendulum will swing on the lower plane without dragging your consciousness with it. Then apply the sixth principle. Cause and effect operate continuously. Every state you sustain in consciousness is a cause. Every condition you experience in life is an effect. The chain runs in one direction only. Inner cause produces outer effect, never the reverse. The reverse appears to be true to the untrained observer. The trained observer recognizes the actual direction of the flow and operates from it. Apply the seventh principle. Creation requires both poles of gender working together. The masculine principle initiates and directs. The feminine principle receives and gestates. Within your own consciousness, both poles operate. the will that selects a target, the receptive space that allows the target to develop into form. Neither pole alone accomplishes anything. The integration of the two, sustained over time, produces every act of conscious creation any human being has ever performed. These 7, taken together, constitute the operating system Atkinson assembled in 1908. The system has been running in millions of human nervous systems for more than a century, still running, and it works. Now, return to the basement in Chicago in the summer of 1908. The press is running, pages emerging, get cut, bound in deep blue cloth with modest gold lettering, 223 pages of compressed Hermetic philosophy written by a 46-year-old man who has spent the last decade restoring his shattered life through the application of the very principles his book transmits. He withholds his name from the cover. He labels the work 3 Initiates, then steps back, releases the book into the world, and continues writing under his other invented identities until his death, 24 years later. The book finds its audience. The audience grows. Teachers of the next generation absorb the principles. Teachers of the generation after that absorb them again. Every available channel of American, eventually global spiritual institutions, instructions carried forward by reader and reader, decade after decade, until the architecture Atkinson had assembled becomes visible from the invisible, because it is everywhere. You have been operating inside it your entire life. Every manifestation teacher you've ever heard, every law of attraction framework, every visualization technique, every affirmation practice, every guided meditation, all of it descends somewhere upstream in the lineage from the 7 principles a man named William Walker Atkinson assembled into a small hardcover book in the summer of 1908. The principles did the work. They are still doing it. The question the book has been quietly pressing on every reader for over a century is the question every Hermetic teaching in every era has eventually returned to. Reality is mental. Your consciousness participates in the field that produces it. The state you sustain in awareness becomes, across time, the conditions you inhabit. You've always known this. You may have forgotten that you knew. You may have been taught to dismiss it as wishful thinking or magical thinking or unscientific thinking by a culture that has yet to fully metabolize what its own influential spiritual texts have been transmitting for more than 100 years. The Kybalion is still in print. The principles are still operational. The transmission is still arriving. Your part of the work begins the moment you decide to apply what the book has been teaching. The lips of wisdom are closed. The Kybalion declares except to the ears of understanding. Your ears are open. The teaching is yours. Now, I'm continually asked, Brian, why don't you read the Kybalion? It's because there's so many amazing versions of the Kybalion already available on YouTube. That's where I go to listen to it. But I definitely wanted to talk about it. I definitely recommend that you look at it, understanding what it truly is. And I do not believe that the fact that it wasn't written by the 3 Initiates means anything. In this particular case, the actual teaching itself is so profound and carries such a long history that it's worth delving into. And there's much more than I've been able to express just in these few moments of discussing it with you. You can create any reality, and a good place to start is the Kybalion. Now, before I go, I want to invite you to join the Reality Revolution community, where we offer weekly group coaching sessions, amazing access to interviews and audiobooks you can't find anywhere else, unique meditations, an amazing group of people that work together to help you to manifest your dreams and goals. You can find the link in the description at www.skool.com, skool.com. I'm sending all my love to everyone listening. It is such an honor and a little bit unusual and weird for me to be sitting in front of a camera, something I never really thought I would do. But I'm super glad that you guys have continued to stick with me, and this channel continues to grow. We have so many amazing new episodes on the way. Can't wait to share them with you. Welcome to the Reality Revolution. 3 days, 9 sessions. You're invited to a complete timeline shift This July, the Reality Revolution comes home to Anaheim for the most immersive 3-day experience I have ever built. Activate your pineal gland, meet your higher self, quantum jump into your greatest timeline, enter the bliss body healing state, step into the flow of large sums of money, open fully to love and shift into the higher density new earth. Every session combines deep teaching with guided activation, the same techniques that have produced extraordinary transformations at every Reality Revolution event. Friday night, the community celebrates together. Saturday evening, we have a special appearance from Daryl Anka. Sunday, you walk out as a new version of yourself. July 24th through the 26th at the Hilton Anaheim. Early bird pricing available now at www.brianscottlive.com/Anaheim.